This is the Mazda CX-30, and if you're familiar with Mazda's lineup, then this new SUV's name might be a bit confusing. Mazda's already got a CX-3 and a CX-5. This CX-30 sits in the middle of those two cars, and it's not the CX-4, because Mazda had already nabbed that name for another model in China. And right now you can save more than £1,400 on the CX-30 by going to whatcar.com. And before we start the rest of this review by telling you everything about this car, make sure you're subscribed to our channel because we've got loads of new car reviews going live every week. The Mazda CX-30 is a rival to SUVs like the Skoda Karoq and the Seat Ateca, but the pricier versions of it also get pretty close to the Volvo XC40. Now, the car itself is actually based on the new Mazda 3 hatchback, but in fact it's been made to be slightly shorter. And the first thing you notice when you get in the car is that this really doesn't feel like an SUV. So you don't sit noticeably high off the ground. In fact, it feels no higher than just a normal hatchback. But if that isn't such a problem for you, then there are lots of things to like in the CX-30's interior. To start with, plenty of adjustment in the steering wheel. And the steering wheel itself feels really nice. It's not awkwardly chunky and big, and it's not too skinny. It is just right. Feels like really nice material around it as well. And the seat also has loads of adjustment too. You've even got the option of lifting up the front of it to support your thighs, but you can't get adjustable lumbar support on the trims below the top two ones. These front pillars could be a little thinner. They can sometimes get in the way of your view when you're trying to pull out at junctions. But the view over the shoulder towards the back is okay, but you've got pretty small rear windows, and also the rear screen itself is pretty small as well. So it's not a patch on the nice large glass area that you get in the Skoda Karoq, but it's still not awful either. And also you get front and rear parking sensors and a reversing camera as standard. And you can also get one of those bird's eye view 360-degree cameras too. Another good thing about the driving position is that you get a part digital driver display. Now, it's not fully digital, so it doesn't show you the breadth of information, and it's not quite as customizable as that in the Seat and Skoda SUVs, but it's still very crisp, very clear, and you also get a head-up display as standard on every model. But where the CX-30 really stands out against every rival you can put it up against is the build quality in here, because it's excellent. So all these materials on the dash are incredibly plush, feel really nice, solid, durable, and all the buttons have a real good feel of quality to them as well. And you can also get this nice kind of two-tone leather effect on the dashboard too. And you can also have a nice bright leather interior for your seats too. So the quality in here is excellent. You've got to jump up to cars like the BMW X1 and the Volvo XC40 to get close to what the CX-30 offers. Another area where the CX-30 stands out from its rivals inside is with its infotainment, because it's got this 8.8-inch screen which is recessed into the dashboard and centrally mounted here, but it's just a screen. It's not a touch screen, because instead it's got this rotary dial down here with some shortcut buttons around it, and you can only use this and the shortcut buttons on the steering wheel to control it. Mazda has decided not to use a touchscreen because it says that it's too distracting to use on the move, and you can't really argue with that, can you? Now, do not despair at all that this isn't a touchscreen, because it's incredibly simple to use, very responsive, just as responsive as the other systems available in Seat, Skoda SUVs as well. And these shortcut buttons are very intuitive. It's got a simple menu layout, and really it's just great to use. Plus, don't forget, it comes with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, as well as a DAB radio and Bluetooth, which of course you're coming to expect now. Now, the space up front is pretty good. Even with this panoramic sunroof fitted, there's plenty of headroom, and as we've said, loads of adjustment in this driving position. Even if you've got long legs, you're going to be fine up front. It also feels like a relatively wide interior, and for storage you've got this slidable armrest here, which is actually very well placed, I must say. And when you slide it back, you can see underneath here you've got this storage compartment with a USB port, and further up on the center console underneath here a couple of cup holders, which are very neatly disguised with this lid when it's closed, and ahead of that a very handy tray where you can chuck your keys. As for the glove box, pretty good size, nothing particularly special, but generally hugely impressive up front in the CX-30. But in the back, things aren't so good, and it starts with the doors, because if you look, they aren't actually that big, and they don't open that wide either, so getting in is a bit more of a struggle than it is in other SUVs. And then when you are here, the legroom isn't as good as a Skoda Karoq or a Seat Ateca, especially if you're behind a tall driver, obviously. But there is an okay amount of room for your feet under the seat in front. Headroom is all right too, but generally a Karoq gives you a far greater sense of airiness in the back, especially because, if you can see, these windows are pretty small here in the back of the CX-30 too, so it just doesn't really feel very spacious. And you also only have a 60-40 split folding rear seats, whereas a Karoq gets 40-20-40 split folding seats. You also can't fold those rear seats from the boot, but the space you do get is more than you will in a Volkswagen Golf or any other hatchback of a similar size. But by family SUV standards, this is below average. It's around the same as a Nissan Qashqai, but smaller than the Seat Ateca and Karoq. You don't have a 2-level boot floor either, but an electric tailgate is standard on all but the entry-level trim. Lower trim levels of the Mazda CX-30 are priced pretty much in line with the equivalent versions of the Skoda Karoq, but as you go up the trim levels, then you get closer to other versions of the Volvo XC40. So in other words, this can be an expensive car, but to save more than £1,400 on one right now, go to whatcar.com. Official emissions figures are decent, and as for the fuel economy, we managed 37.6 miles per gallon from the Skyactiv G during our testing, not quite matching official figures. Mazda has a pretty good reliability record, and every CX-30 comes with a 3-year or 60,000 mile warranty, which is the same offered by Audi, Seat, Skoda and Volkswagen. In Euro NCAP safety tests, the CX-30 was found to afford outstanding protection to the driver and front seat passenger, and achieved an excellent 99% score for adult occupant protection. This helped it towards receiving 5 stars, the organisation's top rating. The CX-30 comes with automatic emergency braking, blind spot monitoring, lane departure warning with lane keeping assistance, a rear cross traffic alert system to warn traffic in your path when reversing into a road, and a driver attention alert system as standard. That's more standard safety equipment than many competitors can muster. Now, there are a few problems with the Mazda CX-30 on the road. We'll start with the engines, because we're used to this in every other Mazda. It offers naturally aspirated engines rather than turbocharged engines, which many of its rivals have. And the downside of that is that it just doesn't offer the low rev in-gear flexibility that you get in the Karoq and in the Ateca. So it means these engines can feel a bit weedy. Now, there are 2 available, and of them, it's the Skyactiv G 2 litre, which is the better one to recommend, because it gets 120 brake horsepower, and the Skyactiv X gets 178 brake horsepower, and it actually gets lower CO2 emissions, but it's so much more expensive, and you need to be working it pretty hard to notice that extra pace that it brings. So on balance, we definitely stick with the Skyactiv G. One benefit though of these 4-cylinder 2 litre engines is that they are generally smoother and quieter than the 3-cylinder turbocharged engines in its rivals. And another good thing about the CX-30 is the excellent 6-speed manual gearbox that it gets. It's got a really short, snappy throw, it's just great to use, got a really reassuringly mechanical feel to it as well. And it's just brilliant, much nicer than plenty of other manual gearboxes in this class. You can also get a 6-speed automatic gearbox as an option, and while that's actually fairly responsive and pretty good, we definitely stick with the manual because it's so good. When it comes to the ride in the CX-30, there is a bit of fidget to it at low speeds, and indeed even when you're on the motorway going a bit quicker, it doesn't really settle down much then either. So when you pass over a pothole, you get a pretty strong thud up through the seat, and something like a Karoq just offers a much more cushioned, comfortable, relaxing drive than the CX-30. Although the upshot of that slightly unsettled ride in the CX-30 is that the body control is actually pretty good. So if you go around some corners quite quickly, there's really not much body lean to contend with at all, so it feels quite well tied down in that respect. So certainly, the first few corners that you take in the CX-30, you'll probably be thinking that this feels a bit like a driver's SUV, if there is such a thing. And the steering as well, it doesn't feel massively responsive just off centre, but there's a good weight to it, and it builds weight progressively as you go through a corner when you increase your speed as well. However, although it might initially give the impression that it's quite good to drive, when you do really push on, it runs out of front wheel grip sooner than something like a Karoq, not to mention the Seat Ateca, which remains the handling benchmark in this class. So ultimately, it might initially feel quite good to drive, but it's still not up there with its rivals. So now you've heard all about the Mazda CX-30. If you do want to buy one, how should you spec it? There are 5 trim levels to choose from, and we think SEL Luxe is the one to go for. It's one up from entry-level SEL, and it gives you an electric tailgate, heated front seats, climate control, and keyless entry. The 2-litre Skyactiv G is the pick of the range, and we'd stick with 2-wheel drive models and this sweet 6-speed manual gearbox to keep the price down. As for the paint, there is a no-cost Arctic white solid paint option, but the metallic paints cost £550. We'd stick with 16-inch alloys because if you want these bigger 18-inch alloys, then you need a higher trim level and they don't help the ride. There's no essentials we think are worth adding, but if you want to impress your friends with LED puddle lights, then they're a very reasonable £42.64. Wireless phone charging will be another £124. That is everything you need to know about the Mazda CX-30, a family SUV that is brilliant up front and inside, not so great in the back, and not quite so impressive on the road as its rivals. For even more information on this car and every other car we've mentioned in this video, and indeed every other car you could possibly imagine, go to whatcar.com because we've got loads of written reviews there. And if you do want to buy this car, don't forget that you can save more than £1,400 right now on whatcar.com. And if you have enjoyed this video or found it useful, then it would be great if you gave it a like. If you've got any opinions or thoughts about the car, then make sure you leave a comment below. And please subscribe because we have loads of videos coming out every week.